Hello and welcome to my history revision channel, which I thought I would create in order to help those who are struggling at this time with their studies and to impart my knowledge to both students who are studying this period within their curriculum or to anyone who is interested in this period of history. It is one of my favourites. So we're going to start with what was the boom? So the boom refers to the stimulation of US industry and economy that was seen at this time, which seemed to grow at an extremely fast rate during the 1920s. The prosperity of these years was driven by the consumerist and capitalist society of the USA, where the beliefs that anyone could be rich and rugged individualism contributed to the growing confidence of the Americans. The term boom encapsulates the growth of industry that was seen in some of these statistics. So, inflation never rose higher than 1%. The number of hours a week worked by employees decreased from 47 in 1920 to 44 in 1929, which shows just how much the industries were thriving as the supply was able to meet the demand in such a way that the work was not as necessary as it had been before. And the real wages of industrial workers, which real wages are the value of the wages in terms of how much they will actually buy, increased by 14% from 1914 to 1929, which shows the individual impact that this had on the regular workers within the 1920s. The GNP, the gross national product, increased from $73 billion in 1920 to $104 billion in 1929. So now we're going to have a look at why did the boom happen. So the first reason that we're going to talk about is the First World War. During this conflict in Europe, the USA was able to supply foodstuffs, weapons, and chemicals to Europe. This meant that these industries in the USA were able to develop in a way that they had never been able to before, as they had a confirmed market in Europe for their goods and heavy investment from the government, who recognised and utilised this market, which was seen in Europe, as a way to positively use this within the USA. Technology was therefore able to be focused on due to the growing demand, which meant that new techniques such as the production line revolutionised by Henry Ford and new products were able to be developed. The one-way trade, as I've called it on the presentation, also allowed the industries within the USA to thrive, as they were able to export their goods without importing any in return. Therefore, as you can see from this favourable situation, this reversed deficit allowed the USA to continue to invest in their own industries whilst maintaining an income from abroad. These advantageous foreign markets were also seen within other interests abroad, such as oil concessions, which were bought in many countries, such as Canada, Venezuela, and Iraq during this time, which meant that the growing industry was able to be fueled using these assets. This was also a time for the agricultural industry to develop as a result of the demand in Europe, which meant that new methods were able to be created, increasing production in a way that had never been seen before. So, cars were the next cause of the boom, as during the 1920s, the motor industry was the biggest in the USA. By 1929, there were 23 million cars on the road, which shows just how significant this industry was. The significance of the motor industry in stimulating the boom in the USA can be seen in the other industries that were promoted through automobile production. The motor industry was the largest market for commodities, as materials such as glass, leather, steel, rubber, and petrol were also needed in order to make the cars. This meant that these industries also thrived as there was a large demand for their output. So during the 1920s, the motor industry employed 7% of all workers and paid them 9% of all wages. This shows how cars were able to increase employment and offer jobs to a growing workforce. For the cars to be able to be used, roads also had to be built, which was a huge endeavour for the government, as only 1% of the 3 million miles of road in 1920 were suitable for cars. Many of them were only suitable for horses, which had been the mode of transport before the 1920s. Therefore, through the Federal Highway Act of 1921, 10,000 miles of road was built per year, which helped to increase employment in these projects and also meant that people could be transported across the country more easily, but also that goods could be transported across the USA, which was something that hadn't been quite as accessible before this time. Therefore, industries were able to increase the market for their goods as they were able to be distributed across a wider area, which further helped to increase their production and therefore their industry as there was a higher demand for them. In 1919, under 1 million trucks were registered to transport goods, whereas in 1929, 3.5 million were registered, which shows just how much this was able to increase the distribution of goods in order to stimulate these industries. With new roads also came new landscapes across the USA, where services such as petrol stations, motels, and garages also started to grow and increased the sector even more. Cars were also significant in the creation of suburbs around the industrial cities, which were emerging as a result of the rapid industrialization. Due to the ease of travel created by cars, people were able to live further away from their jobs, meaning that housing did not need to be within the main city. This was therefore a time when suburbs were first seen. So, the government also had a significant role in helping the boom in the 1920s. So, firstly, the laissez-faire approach of Calvin Coolidge's government favoured limited intervention from the government, where the free market was seen as necessary to maintain a healthy economy. A free market was where the economy ran itself without government help. And this included the cycle, which was fundamental to the US economy at the time. So this was where increases in industry increased the number of jobs available, increasing employment, increasing the ability of the of the employees to spend their money into industry, which therefore expands industry, and the cycle would then continue. However, laissez-faire politics was not consistent across all government actions. For example, the protective tariffs. So the high tariffs imposed by the Ford-Macumber Act of 1922 aimed to protect the USA's domestic market, as it made it expensive to import goods from abroad. So the idea behind this was that people would not buy foreign goods due to their high price and would instead buy American-made goods, therefore stimulating US industries only and not those abroad. It guaranteed a market to growing industries who were able to sell their goods to American consumers without foreign competition, which was really fundamental to helping this boom spread, as it meant that the US industries were able to expand, knowing that there would be people to buy their goods. So the next Republican policy that persisted throughout the years of prosperity included the low taxation of the people. Limited government intervention meant that they did not want to interfere within the ideology that every man has the possibility to become rich. Therefore, richer companies and personal fortunes were not usurped by the government. This meant that industries were able to thrive without having to pay back to the government, which the Republicans saw as crucial in allowing expansion. The low taxation also meant that people had more money to spend on American goods, which therefore stimulated the cycle that we just spoke about, where people would spend more money in industry would expand, more employment, more spending. So the government didn't see that they had a role in this cycle, therefore they decreased taxes in order to also help to decrease the national debt that was seen, which is the amount of money that the people owe to the government. So powerful trusts were also seen as responsible for the running of the economy, as the government felt that big businesses were more equipped for this task. This went hand in hand with the fewer regulations imposed on industries, as laws concerning practices such as price fixing were often ignored. Price fixing is where prices are decided among businesses to prevent fair competition. The Federal Trade Commission was also reluctant to operate effectively and restrict illegal practices from industry, which meant that they had no restrictions on their practices, which was therefore positive for them. So one other cause of the boom in the 1920s was the new methods. So these were created in order to produce goods and therefore stimulate industry. So electricity was firstly able to make processes more efficient, therefore was able to supply more products, and the production line, revolutionized by Henry Ford, was able to make sure that production time was decreased, therefore more could be produced. The increasing ability to advertise products was also created a greater market, as new products such as the radio and the increase in popularity of the cinema meant that products could be promoted to a wider audience. Easy credit also meant that more people were able to afford the products, as they could buy in installments. And mail order also increased the area to which products could be sold. This therefore promoted the consumerist ideals of society, who were constantly bombarded by the need for new products, which they could now afford. So I hope that this has helped to outline some of the causes of the boom in the 1920s, and that you've been able to learn a little bit about why prosperity was seen to arise within the USA. If this has been helpful, comment any other periods of history that you would like me to cover. Next time, we'll be covering society in the USA in the 1920s and how this changed after the First World War. Thank you very much for watching.